We only kept you because of the tax benefits. My mother said it like she was commenting on the weather. Casual. Light. Almost amused. Right there, in the middle of my 25th birthday dinner, with waiters moving between tables and a country song humming softly through the speakers. It didn't feel real at first. It felt like one of those moments where your brain refuses to process what it just heard, so everything slows down instead. The clink of silverware at the next table sounded louder. The ice shifting in someone's glass behind me echoed like it was right next to my ear. And my mother, Diane Carter, sat across from me smiling like she had just made a clever joke. But she hadn't. And the worst part? She didn't realize what she had just done. Because what she didn't know, what neither she nor my father, Mark Carter, had any idea about, was that I had been preparing for this exact moment for almost a year. And the people sitting 2 tables behind her? They weren't strangers. Not even close. If you're listening to this right now and you've ever had a moment where something didn't just hurt, it rewrote everything you thought you knew about your life, go ahead and subscribe to Women Reddit Stories. Stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're reminders that you're not alone, no matter how complicated your situation feels. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even move right away. Instead, I just sat there, looking at her, letting the silence stretch a few seconds longer than she was comfortable with. My father shifted in his seat, clearing his throat like he always did when he didn't know what to say. Diane reached for her wine glass, completely unfazed, taking a small sip like she had just said something mildly inconvenient, not something that should shatter a person. "You're joking, right?" I asked. My voice came out steady. Calmer than I expected. Diane tilted her head slightly, studying me like she was trying to figure out why I wasn't reacting the way she thought I would. "Well," she said, setting her glass down, "I mean, that's not the only reason. But it was a big factor back then. We were going through a rough patch financially, and the credits helped. You turned out fine, though. You turned out fine. Like I was a return on investment." I let that sit between us for a moment. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to hear what they would say next if I gave them space. That was something I had learned over the past 11 months. People reveal themselves if you let the silence do the work. My father rubbed the back of his neck. "Your mom doesn't mean it like that," he muttered. "It's just, things were different back then." Different. I almost smiled at that. Because that word, different, was doing a lot of heavy lifting for something that was actually very simple. They had made a decision. And now, they were finally saying it out loud. "I see," I said quietly. And I did. I understood more than they realized. But to understand why I wasn't breaking down at that table, why I wasn't begging for some kind of explanation or apology, you need to go back to a night 11 months earlier. Back to a place that smelled like dust and cardboard and something else I couldn't quite name at the time, but now I know exactly what it was. Secrets. 11 months before that dinner, I was in my parents' garage. Not because I wanted to be, but because Diane had left a note on my apartment door that morning. No greeting, no explanation, just 3 words written in her neat, sharp handwriting. Garage. Today. Clean. That was how she communicated when something wasn't optional. So after my shift at the dental office, I drove over, let myself in through the side door, and stepped into a space I hadn't really paid attention to in years. The garage was packed. Old furniture stacked against one wall, plastic storage bins piled on top of each other, boxes labeled in fading marker. Christmas decorations. Camping gear. Things they hadn't touched in over a decade but refused to throw away. I tied my hair back, grabbed a box cutter from the workbench, and started sorting. At first, it was mindless. Open a box. Toss what was junk. Stack what needed to stay. Wipe down shelves. The kind of work you do on autopilot while your mind drifts somewhere else. But about an hour in, I noticed something odd. Behind a stack of old paint cans, tucked into the far corner near the back wall, there was a single box that didn't match the others. It was newer. Cleaner. Sealed tightly with fresh packing tape. And written across the top in black marker were 2 words. Important documents. With Diane, that label could mean anything. Insurance papers. Tax returns. Property records. Or something else. I stared at it for a few seconds longer than I should have. I knew I shouldn't open it. Not because of privacy. That had never really been a boundary in our house. Diane went through my things whenever she felt like it. My phone. My mail. My room when I was younger. Privacy was something other people had. Still, something about that box felt different. Like it wasn't meant to be found. I told myself I was just checking to make sure nothing in there needed to be moved or reorganized. That was the excuse I gave myself as I dragged it out from behind the paint cans and set it on the floor. The tape peeled back easily. Too easily. Like it had been opened before. Inside was a manila folder. And the second I saw my name on it, Ethan Carter, printed in bold, typed letters, I felt something shift in my chest. Not panic. Not yet. Just awareness. I sat down on the concrete floor, the cool surface seeping through my jeans, and opened the folder. The first document was a birth certificate. But not the one I had seen my entire life. This one was different. Different format. Different signatures. And right there, where it should have said Diane Carter under Mother, it said something else. Rachel Whitmore. I stared at the name, reading it again, slower this time, like maybe I had misunderstood it the first time. Rachel Whitmore. I had never heard that name before in my life. Not once. My hands moved automatically, flipping to the next document. Adoption papers. Official. Stamped. Finalized. I was 3 days old when it happened. 3 days. Underneath that, another sheet. A printed document from a tax consultant. Numbers. Line items. Calculations. And one section highlighted in yellow. Adoption tax credit, $6,200. I didn't react right away. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I just sat there on that garage floor, holding those papers, as something quiet and heavy settled into place inside me. Because suddenly, things that never quite made sense, started to make a different kind of sense. Every time Diane told people how lucky I was. Every time my father avoided questions about my baby photos. Every time I felt like I was part of the family, but never quite fully. It all rearranged itself. Not into something new. Into something true. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally reached for my phone. There was only one person I could call. And when she picked up on the second ring, I didn't bother with small talk. "Hey, my best friend," Megan said. "What's up?" I swallowed, staring down at the name on that birth certificate. "Can you meet me?" I asked. "Not here. Somewhere else." There was a pause. "Ethan," she said slowly, "you're scaring me." "What happened?" I exhaled, gripping the edge of the folder a little tighter. I said, my voice quieter now, steadier in a way that surprised me. I think my entire life just changed. I didn't wait for her to ask anything else. "I'll text you the location," I said, then ended the call before my voice had a chance to shift into something less controlled. I carefully slid the documents back into the folder, placed it exactly where I had found it, and resealed the box as neatly as I could. Every movement felt deliberate, like if I rushed even slightly, something inside me might crack open before I was ready. By the time I got into my car, the name was still echoing in my head. Rachel Whitmore. It didn't feel like a stranger's name. It felt like something that had always been there, just out of reach. I drove 10 minutes down the road to a grocery store parking lot we used to meet at in high school. Neutral ground. No memories tied to my parents. No risk of running into anyone who knew them. Megan was already there when I pulled in, leaning against her car with her arms crossed, her expression tight with concern. She pushed off the door the second she saw me step out. "What happened?" she asked, walking toward me. "You sounded." I didn't say anything. I just handed her the folded birth certificate. She took it, her brows pulling together as she read. Then she read it again. Slower. "Rachel Whitmore," she said quietly. "Who's that?" "I don't know." The words came out flat. Honest. And heavier than anything I had ever said out loud. Megan looked up at me, searching my face like she was trying to figure out if I was about to fall apart. "You didn't know you were adopted?" she asked. I shook my head once. "No." She exhaled slowly, glancing back down at the paper, then at the rest of the documents I handed her one by one. Adoption papers. The tax document. The highlighted line. I watched her expression change as it clicked into place. "Ethan," she said, softer now. "I'm fine," I replied automatically. And the strange thing was, I wasn't lying. Not yet. Because whatever I was feeling, it wasn't the kind of emotion that bursts out all at once. It was the kind that settles in layers, quiet and patient, waiting for you to catch up to it. Megan folded the papers carefully and handed them back to me. "Okay," she said, shifting into the version of herself I had known since we were kids, the one that didn't panic, the one that solved things. "We don't jump to conclusions yet." "I'm not jumping," I said. "It's pretty clear." "Clear doesn't mean complete," she countered. "There's a difference." I almost smiled at that. Because she was right. There was a difference between knowing something happened and understanding why. And for some reason, the why mattered more to me than the what. Megan reached into the back seat of her car and pulled out a small box. "Remember this," she said. I stared at it for a second before it clicked. "The DNA kit you gave me for Christmas." "Yeah," she said. "The one you never used." I let out a quiet breath, running a hand through my hair. "I told you I didn't need it." "You told me you already knew where you came from," she corrected gently. "That doesn't seem entirely accurate anymore." I took the box from her, turning it over in my hands. It felt different now. Before, it had been unnecessary. Pointless, even. Now it felt like the only way forward. "Do it tonight," Megan said. "No overthinking. No waiting. Just, get the process started." I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said. "Okay." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the kit open in front of me. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Every small sound felt louder than usual, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the faint noise of traffic outside. I followed the instructions carefully. Swab. Seal. Register. Simple steps. But each one felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. By the time I dropped the envelope into the mailbox down the street, it was almost midnight. 6 to 8 weeks for results. 6 to 8 weeks of pretending everything was normal. 6 to 8 weeks of sitting across from Diane at dinner and hearing her talk about things that suddenly felt rehearsed. I didn't confront them. Not because I was afraid. But because something inside me told me that if I moved too soon, I would lose control of the situation. And for the first time in my life, control mattered. So I waited. And while I waited, I watched. It's strange how quickly your perspective shifts once you know something fundamental has been hidden from you. Things you ignored before start to stand out. The way Diane would tell people, "We gave him everything," like it was a line she had practiced. The way my father would go quiet during those conversations, suddenly interested in anything that wasn't eye contact. The way questions about my early childhood were always redirected, softened, or avoided altogether. I had noticed those things before. I just hadn't understood them. Now I did. I kept paying my rent for the small apartment behind their house. I kept showing up for Sunday dinners. I kept answering Diane's questions with polite, measured responses. On the outside, nothing changed. On the inside, everything did. Megan checked in on me constantly. "How are you holding up?" she asked one afternoon while we sat in her car outside the coffee shop near her office. "I'm waiting," I said. She gave me a look. "For what?" "For confirmation." I didn't tell her the rest. That I was also waiting for something else. For the moment when everything would stop being a suspicion and become something undeniable. Because once that happened, there would be no going back. The email came on a Wednesday. I was sitting in my car during my lunch break, halfway through a sandwich I hadn't really been eating, scrolling through my phone out of habit more than interest. The notification slid across the screen. New DNA match found, close family. Everything in me went still. I tapped it. The page loaded slower than it should have, the spinning icon dragging out the moment just long enough to make my chest tighten. And then it appeared. Rachel Whitmore. Age 48. Location, Asheville, North Carolina. Match confidence, 99.8%. Relationship, parent. I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over again, like maybe they would change if I looked at them long enough. They didn't. There was a profile picture. A woman standing outside what looked like a small house, sunlight catching in her hair. She had a soft expression, the kind that didn't try to impress anyone. There was nothing dramatic about her. Nothing performative. Just real. My throat felt tight, but not in a way that made me want to cry. In a way that made it hard to breathe normally. I scrolled further. Married. Spouse, Daniel Whitmore. One child listed. Lucas Whitmore. Age 21. I blinked. I had a brother. The thought didn't hit all at once. It unfolded slowly, like everything else. Another life. Another version of reality that had been existing this entire time without me even knowing it. My sandwich sat untouched on the passenger seat for the rest of my break. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared at the screen until the brightness dimmed. Then I locked my phone and leaned back in the seat, staring at the ceiling of the car. For a long time, I didn't do anything. Because this was the part where everything could still stay contained. If I didn't reach out. If I didn't open that door. Then technically, nothing had to change. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, everything had already changed the second I opened that box in the garage. This was just the moment it became impossible to ignore. I unlocked my phone again. Opened the message window. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. Deleted that too. Every version felt wrong. Too emotional. Too distant. Too much. Too little. Finally, I stopped trying to get it perfect. I wrote 3 lines. My name is Ethan Carter. I believe you may be my biological mother. I'm not reaching out with anger. I just want to understand. I stared at the message for a few seconds. Then I hit send before I could second-guess it. 4 hours later, my phone buzzed. One message. From Rachel Whitmore. I opened it. I've been hoping for this message for 25 years. I read it once. Then again. And then a third time, slower. And for the first time since I found that box. I felt something shift. Not confusion. Not anger. Something deeper. Something that felt like the beginning of an answer. I pressed my phone against my chest and closed my eyes. Because somewhere, 2 states away, there was a woman who had been waiting for me. and sitting at a dinner table not far from where I was, there was another woman who had just told me I was a tax benefit. But Diane Carter didn't know any of this. Not yet. And for the next 3 months, I lived in both worlds. For 3 months, I lived 2 completely different lives. On the surface, nothing changed. I still showed up to Sunday dinners at my parents' house. I still listened to Diane talk about neighbors, church events, and whatever version of reality she had decided to present that week. I still watched my father sit quietly beside her, nodding at the right moments, saying just enough to avoid conflict but never enough to actually participate. If anyone had been watching from the outside, they would have said everything looked normal. But it wasn't. Because every few days, I was driving 3 hours east to Asheville. The first time I made that drive, my hands stayed tight on the steering wheel the entire way. Not because I was nervous about meeting Rachel, but because I didn't know what version of myself I was supposed to bring with me. The son who had just discovered his entire life wasn't what he thought? Or the person I had always been, just redirected? I didn't have an answer by the time I pulled into the driveway. The house was smaller than I expected. A single-story place with a wide front porch, wind chimes hanging near the door, and a garden that looked like someone actually spent time taking care of it instead of just maintaining it for appearances. Rachel opened the door before I even knocked. For a second, neither of us said anything. She just stood there, looking at me like she was trying to memorize every detail all at once. And I realized, in that moment, that she wasn't seeing a stranger. She was seeing something she had been carrying in her mind for 25 years. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft but steady. Hearing my name from her felt different. Not unfamiliar. Just unfiltered. "Hi," I replied. That was it. No dramatic reunion. No overwhelming flood of emotion. Just 2 people standing in a doorway, trying to figure out how to exist in the same moment after missing each other for an entire lifetime. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't overwhelming either. It was certain. Like she had already decided, long before this moment, that if she ever got the chance, she wouldn't hold back. I stood there for a second, surprised by how natural it felt, before I returned the hug. Behind her, a man stepped into view. "Daniel," he said, extending his hand as I pulled away. "It's really good to meet you." His grip was firm. Grounded. The kind of handshake that didn't try to prove anything. "Good to meet you too," I said. And then a voice from somewhere inside the house called out, "Is that him?" A second later, a tall guy with dark hair and a t-shirt that looked like it had been slept in appeared in the hallway. He stopped when he saw me. "You're actually here," he said, like he hadn't fully believed it until that second. "Yeah," I replied, unsure what else to say. He grinned, shaking his head slightly. "I'm Lucas." "My brother," I said, testing the word out loud. It didn't feel wrong. It just felt new. "Yeah," he said, still smiling. "That." The first hour was awkward. There's no way around that. Not uncomfortable, not tense, just unfamiliar. Like trying to jump into a conversation that had been going on for years without you. But something shifted once we sat down at the kitchen table. Rachel brought out food she had clearly spent hours preparing. Not in a showy way, but in a careful, intentional way. Like every dish meant something. "You don't have to eat everything," she said, almost apologetically. "I just didn't know what you'd like." I picked up a fork. "I'll try everything," I said. And I did. Not because I felt obligated. But because for the first time, it felt like someone had made something for me without expecting anything in return. Halfway through the meal, Lucas leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You look like her," he said, nodding toward Rachel. Rachel let out a small laugh. "He does." I glanced between them. "I don't know what that means yet," I admitted. "It means Daniel said calmly, that some things don't need to be explained right away. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else said that day. Because it wasn't trying to force meaning onto the moment. It was just letting it exist. Before I left, Rachel disappeared into another room and came back holding a small box. She set it on the table between us. I kept this, she said quietly. Inside was a hospital wristband. Faded. Small enough that it looked like it belonged to a completely different life. Baby boy Whitmore. I stared at it for a long time. Every year, she continued, her voice steady but softer now, on your birthday, I'd take this out and just sit with it for a while. She didn't say anything else after that. She didn't need to. Because suddenly, the idea that I had been a tax benefit for one family and a missing piece for another wasn't abstract anymore. It was real. I visited 4 more times over the next 3 months. Each visit got easier. Not because the situation became less complicated, but because the pressure to define it started to fade. With Rachel, I didn't feel like I had to perform anything. She asked questions. Not surface-level ones. Real ones. What was your favorite subject in school? Did you ever play any sports? What kind of things make you feel calm? No one had ever asked me that last one before. Not in a way that sounded like they actually cared about the answer. With Daniel, conversations were quieter. He wasn't the type to fill silence. But he showed up in other ways. The second time I visited, he had already adjusted the guest room so I'd have a place to stay if I didn't want to drive back the same night. Didn't make a big deal out of it. Just did it. Lucas treated me like I had always been there. Not overly sentimental. Not awkward. Just normal. He sent me random texts during the week. Memes I didn't always understand. Updates about things that didn't seem important but somehow were. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't trying to replace my life. I was building a second one. But back in my hometown, things were starting to shift in a different way. 3 weeks before my birthday, Diane did something she hadn't done in years. She invited me to dinner. Not Sunday dinner. Not something routine. Something specific. There's a new place downtown, she said, standing in the doorway of my apartment like she owned the space, which in some ways she still believed she did. Nice atmosphere. We thought we'd take you out for your birthday this year. We? I asked. Your father and I, she said. Just the 3 of us. There was something in her tone. Something overly deliberate. Like she had already planned the conversation that would happen at that table. Sounds good, I said. Because I already knew. 2 weeks before my birthday, I came home to a typed notice taped to my door. No greeting. No explanation. Just information. Effective next month, rent for the apartment will increase from $500 to $950. I read it twice. Then a third time. At the bottom was Diane's signature. Sharp. Final. I did the math in my head without even meaning to. $950 for rent. $300 for health insurance if they removed me from their plan. Utilities. Food. Gas. It didn't work. Not on my salary. And it wasn't supposed to. I walked across the yard to the main house. My father was in the kitchen, pouring himself coffee. Did you see the notice? I asked. He didn't look up. Your mom has her reasons, he said. And what are those? I asked. He stirred his coffee slowly, the spoon tapping against the mug in a steady rhythm. She thinks it's time for you to be more independent. Independent. I almost laughed. Because independence wasn't what this was about. This was pressure. Calculated. Intentional. And if I can't afford it? I asked. He finally looked at me. You'll figure something out. That was the moment I understood something clearly. This wasn't random. This wasn't sudden. This was a setup. And Diane Carter didn't realize. I had already found another way out. I didn't argue with him. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I finally understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. Arguing only works when both people are willing to engage honestly. And my father wasn't. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't loud. He wasn't even particularly cold. He just didn't stand anywhere. And that made him just as predictable as Diane. So instead of pushing, I nodded once, turned around, and walked back to my apartment without another word. The second I closed the door behind me, I pulled out my phone. Not to call them. To call Rachel. She picked up on the first ring. "Hey," she said, and I could hear something in her voice shift immediately. "What happened?" I sat down on the edge of my bed, staring at the notice still in my hand. "They raised my rent," I said. "Almost double. And I'm pretty sure they're about to take me off their insurance." There was a pause. Not the kind that comes from hesitation. The kind that comes from someone choosing their words carefully. "Okay," she said. "Then we figure it out. No panic. No overreaction. Just steady." I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "I don't want to jump from one dependency to another," I said. "I need to be able to stand on my own." "You will," she replied. "But standing on your own doesn't mean doing everything alone." That landed differently than anything Diane had ever said to me. Because it wasn't about control. It was about support. "We have a guest room," Rachel continued. "No pressure. No timeline. Just an option." I closed my eyes for a second. "Let me think about it," I said. "Of course," she replied immediately. "Take whatever time you need." That was the difference. Time wasn't something she used as leverage. She offered it. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, the notice still in my hand, the numbers still running through my head. 950. 300 for insurance. Everything about it was designed to push me into a corner. But corners only work if you don't have anywhere else to go. And I did. I just needed to make sure I was ready before I moved. The next morning, I called the insurance company during my lunch break. I stepped outside the office, leaning against the brick wall as the representative pulled up my account. If my parents remove me from their plan before I turned 26, I asked, "What are my options?" She explained it clearly. They could remove me at any time. That would qualify me for a special enrollment period. Marketplace plans would range between $280 and $400 a month depending on coverage. High deductible. Basic protection. Enough to get by. I wrote the number down on the back of a receipt. 300. It was tight. But it was possible. That afternoon, Megan found me reorganizing supply cabinets in the back room. Something I only did when I needed to focus on something simple. "You're doing the thing again," she said, leaning against the doorway. "The thing?" I asked, not looking up. "The if I organize everything, maybe my life will make sense thing." I let out a quiet breath. "It helps," I said. She studied me for a second. "Why haven't you told them yet?" she asked. I paused, holding a box of gloves in my hand. "Because if I tell them now," I said slowly, "before I'm ready, I lose everything at once." She didn't interrupt. She just listened. "Housing," I continued. "Insurance. Stability. Whatever control I still have over the situation." Megan nodded. "So you're waiting." "I'm preparing," I corrected. That word mattered. Waiting sounded passive. This wasn't. This was deliberate. She crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. "You're not scared, are you?" she asked. I set the box down, finally looking at her. No, I said honestly. I just don't want to do this halfway. Because halfway would mean reacting. And reacting was exactly what Diane expected. What she didn't expect was control. For days before my birthday, Diane knocked on my door. Not the quick, sharp knock she usually used. This one was softer. Measured. I opened the door. She was smiling. Not her real smile. The one she used in public. The one that made people think she was warm, generous, kind. Ethan, she said. Honey. The word felt strange coming from her now. We're looking forward to Friday, she continued. I made reservations at Harrison's downtown. 7 o'clock. Dress nice. Her tone was light. Carefully so. Like she had rehearsed it. I'll be there, I said. She reached out, patting my arm briefly. The same gesture she always used when she thought she was in control of a situation. Good, she said. It'll be important. Important. That confirmed it. She turned and walked back toward the main house without another word. The second her door closed behind her, I pulled out my phone. Rachel answered before it even finished ringing. It's happening, I said. When? She asked. Friday night. Dinner. There was a small pause. What do you need? She asked. That question again. Not what are you going to do? Not are you sure? What do you need? I want you there, I said. But not at the table. Another pause. Okay, she said. Tell me what you're thinking. Make a reservation, I said. Same restaurant. Sit somewhere nearby. Don't come over unless I signal. I could hear Daniel's voice faintly in the background, asking something. Rachel covered the phone for a second, then came back. We'll be there, she said. All of us. I exhaled slowly. Thank you. You don't have to thank me, she replied. But I did. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into something alone. After we hung up, I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope I had been carrying for weeks. Inside it were 3 things. The DNA results. A printed copy of Rachel's message. And a photo. The 4 of us standing in her backyard, sunlight catching on the edges of the frame, Lucas making some stupid joke that had us all laughing at the exact same moment. Real. Unforced. I ran my fingers along the edge of the photo for a second before sliding it back into the envelope. Friday was 4 days away. 4 days to keep everything steady. 4 days to sit across from Diane like nothing had changed. 4 days to let her believe she was still in control of the story. But the truth was, the story had already shifted. She just didn't know it yet. And on Friday night, in a restaurant full of people who had believed her version of events for years, I was going to let her tell the truth. In her own words. And then I was going to show her what she had missed. Not with anger. Not with shouting. But with something far more unsettling for someone like Diane Carter. Calm. And proof. Friday night, Harrison's. The restaurant was already half full when I walked in. Soft lighting, polished wood floors, low conversation blending into the background with the kind of music you don't really notice unless you're trying to. It was the kind of place people in town went when they wanted to feel like they were somewhere bigger than they actually were. I arrived 10 minutes early. Not because I was eager. Because I wanted time to see everything. I scanned the room slowly, letting my eyes adjust, taking in the layout, the spacing between tables, the way people were positioned. Near the back, along the wall with the tall windows, I saw them. Rachel. Daniel. Lucas. They were seated at a table for 4, menus open, their posture relaxed in a way that looked natural to anyone else. But Rachel's eyes found mine almost immediately. Just a small shift. A slight nod. That was enough. I took my seat at the table near the center of the room, my back straight, my hands resting loosely in my lap. The envelope was in my bag, pressed flat against the inside pocket like it had weight. Not physical weight. Something else. The kind you carry when you know what's coming. Diane and my father arrived right on time. Of course they did. Diane was wearing a navy dress I had seen her save for church events and community dinners. Her makeup was precise, her hair set exactly the way she liked it. She had dressed for this. Not for my birthday. For what she planned to say. My father wore a button-down shirt, the top button fastened even though he hated how it felt. He always did that when he was uncomfortable, like he was trying to hold himself together with fabric. "Ethan," Diane said as she slid into the seat across from me, her smile already in place. "You look nice." "Thanks," I said. My father nodded. "Happy birthday, son." "Thank you." The waiter came by, took drink orders. Diane ordered wine. My father ordered water. I ordered nothing. Small talk followed. Or at least, Diane attempted it. She asked about work. I answered. She didn't really listen. Her eyes kept shifting, toward her purse, toward my father, then back to me. She was waiting. Running through whatever script she had prepared in her head. 2 tables over, a couple I recognized from church sat down, greeting Diane with a wave. She smiled back, that same polished version of herself she showed the world. That was important to her. The audience. It always had been. The waiter returned with drinks. Glasses were set down. Silverware adjusted. And then, without any real transition, Diane folded her hands on the table and leaned forward slightly. There it was. The shift. "We need to talk about something," she said. I didn't react. Not outwardly. But I felt my pulse steady instead of spike. I had already lived this moment in my head more times than I could count. "Okay," I said. She glanced briefly at my father. He nodded once, barely. Then she looked back at me. "You're adopted." The words landed exactly the way she intended them to. Clear. Direct. Controlled. I held her gaze. Not because I was surprised. But because I wanted her to see that I wasn't. She mistook my silence for shock. Of course she did. So she continued. "We took you in when you were 3 days old," she said. "It was the difficult time for us financially, but we made it work." Made it work. There was a slight pause. Then she smiled. Not warmly. Not kindly. Just satisfied. "And the tax benefits helped," she added. "A lot, actually. It's just the reality of the situation." There it was. Out loud. Not hidden in a document. Not implied. Spoken. At a dinner table. On my birthday. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Not pain. Clarity. My father cleared his throat. "We just thought it was time you knew," he said. "Now that you're older." Older. 25. Convenient timing. Diane reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She set it on the table between us. "There's also the matter of the apartment," she said. "We've decided it's time to make some changes." Of course. Everything connected. "You have 30 days to move out," she continued. "We've already discussed it." She slid a pen next to the paper. "If you sign this tonight, we'll keep things simple. If not," she shrugged lightly, "we may need to move that timeline up." Her voice carried just enough that the table next to us went quiet. Not obvious. But noticeable. My father shifted in his seat. "This doesn't have to be difficult," he added, like he was trying to smooth something over that had already been decided. I looked at the paper. then at the pen. Then back at Diane. "I'm not signing anything tonight," I said calmly. Her smile faltered. "Just slightly." "I think it would be best if you did," she replied, her tone tightening just enough to reveal the edge underneath. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "No," I said. "Simple. Final." Her eyes narrowed. "Ethan," she said, her voice lower now, sharper, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." I tilted my head slightly. "Harder for who?" I asked. That landed. She hadn't expected a question. She had expected compliance. Or emotion. Something she could manage. But not this. Not calm. Not resistance without reaction. My father stepped in. "We're trying to be fair here," he said. "By bringing eviction paperwork to a birthday dinner?" I asked. He didn't have an answer for that. Diane's fingers tightened around her wine glass. "We raised you," she said, her voice rising just enough to carry to the surrounding tables. "We gave you everything." I held her gaze. "And what was the annual return on that investment?" I asked quietly. The words were calm. Measured. But they hit. Her hand twitched. "What?" she snapped. "The tax credit," I said. "How much was it again?" My father's face changed. Not dramatically. But enough. Because now he knew. Diane didn't answer. She just stared at me. And for the first time that night, she wasn't in control of the conversation. The silence stretched. Long enough that the couple at the next table had fully stopped pretending not to listen. My father looked between us, something uneasy settling in his expression. "This isn't necessary," he muttered. "No," I said. "It's not." I reached into my bag slowly. Deliberately. And pulled out the envelope. I set it on the table between us. Next to the unsigned paper. Next to the pen. Diane's eyes dropped to it immediately. "What is that?" she asked. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because this part mattered. The pause. The shift. The moment right before everything changes. My fingers rested lightly on the edge of the envelope. I could feel my heartbeat. Steady. Controlled. Ready. Diane leaned forward slightly, her voice sharper now. "Ethan," she said. "What is in that envelope?" I met her eyes. And for the first time that night, I let the silence belong to me. Because what was inside that envelope wasn't just paper. It was the end of her version of the story. And she could feel it coming. I didn't answer her right away. Not because I didn't have one. But because timing matters. And Diane Carter had spent my entire life controlling timing, when conversations happened, how they happened, and how they ended. This time, she didn't get that. "This conversation is about you," she said, her voice tightening as the silence stretched. "Not, whatever game you think you're playing." Game. I almost smiled at that. Because she still thought this was something she could steer. I rested my fingers lightly on the envelope. Then I spoke. "You're right," I said calmly. "It is about me." Her shoulders eased slightly, like she thought she had pulled things back into place. "But not in the way you think." That small shift, those few words, was enough to pull her right back off balance. My father shifted in his seat again, his hand hovering near his glass like he wasn't sure what to do with it. "Ethan," he said quietly, "we don't need to make a scene." I glanced around the restaurant. People weren't pretending anymore. The couple 2 tables over had fully turned in their seats. A waitress near the bar had slowed her steps, her attention caught between service and curiosity. Diane noticed it too. And that was the first real crack. Because she didn't mind being in control in public. But she couldn't stand losing it there. "Lower your voice," she said sharply. I hadn't raised it. I'm not the one making a scene, I replied. That landed harder than anything else so far. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Fine, she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Go ahead. Whatever this is. She gestured toward the envelope like she was granting permission. Like she was still in charge. I nodded once. Then I opened it. Slowly. Deliberately. First, I pulled out the DNA results. I set the paper down between us, turning it so she could read it clearly. 99.8% match. Parent. Rachel Whitmore. Diane leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning the page. At first, there was confusion. Then recognition. Then something else. Something sharper. That doesn't mean anything, she said quickly. Those tests can be wrong. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached into the envelope again. The second item. A printed message. I placed it beside the DNA results. I've been hoping for this message for 25 years. Diane's eyes moved across the words. Her jaw tightened. My father leaned forward, reading over her shoulder. Neither of them spoke. So I continued. The third item. The photograph. I set it down last. Carefully. Centered. Me standing between Rachel and Daniel, sunlight catching the edges of the image, Lucas off to the side mid-laugh, the moment frozen in something that didn't need to be explained. Real. Unforced. Complete. Diane stared at it. And for the first time since I had known her. She didn't have an immediate response. That's not, she started, then stopped. Her voice didn't finish the sentence. Because whatever she was about to say didn't fit anymore. My biological mother's name is Rachel Whitmore, I said calmly. She lives in Asheville. She's a nurse. She's been waiting for me to reach out for 25 years. My father leaned back slightly, like the air had shifted around him. Diane's eyes snapped up to mine. You went behind our backs, she said. Behind our backs. That was her first instinct. Not denial. Not confusion. Control. I found out the truth, I corrected. The rest followed. Her hand tightened around the stem of her glass. You don't know the full story, she said. You don't know what kind of person she is. That was the moment. The line. The one I had been waiting for. I raised my hand slightly. Stop, I said. Not loud. Not aggressive. But firm enough that she actually did. You don't get to talk about her like that, I continued. Not now. Not ever. Her eyes widened slightly. Because that wasn't a reaction she knew how to handle. You don't even know her, she said, her voice sharper now, pushing. I held her gaze. I do, I said. And then I paused. Not for effect. But because the next part mattered. They're here, I added. The words landed softly. But the impact wasn't. Diane froze. My father's head turned slightly, his eyes scanning the room before he even realized he was doing it. What? Diane said. They're here, I repeated. Right now. Her eyes darted across the restaurant. Table to table. Face to face. Searching. Trying to find something she could control. She didn't see them at first. Because she wasn't looking for them. She was looking for a way out. I turned slightly in my seat. And I gave a small nod. Across the room, Rachel stood. Then Daniel. Then Lucas. They didn't rush. They didn't hesitate. They just walked. Step by step. Straight toward us. The room changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But noticeably. Conversation softened. Movement slowed. People watched. Because something was happening, and even if they didn't know exactly what it was, they could feel it. Diane followed my line of sight. And then she saw them. Her expression shifted. Confusion first. Then recognition. Then something deeper. Something closer to panic. Rachel reached the table and stopped beside me. She didn't speak immediately. She didn't need to. She placed her hand lightly on my shoulder. And just like the first time we met, the gesture wasn't hesitant. It was certain. Daniel stood just behind her, steady, quiet. Lucas moved to the side, his arms crossed loosely, his posture relaxed but his presence clear. I looked at Diane. Diane, I said, my voice calm, even, this is Rachel. The word hung there for a second. Then I added it. My mother. It landed exactly the way I intended it to. Not as an attack. As a fact. Diane stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. That's not, she started, her voice rising. Rachel spoke before she could finish. I'm not here to argue, she said, her tone steady, controlled in a way that didn't need volume to carry. I'm here because my son asked me to be. My son. Diane flinched like the words had physical weight. I raised him, she snapped, her composure cracking now. For 25 years. And tonight, I said quietly, you told him why. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Of everything that had just been said. Everything that had been revealed. Everything that couldn't be taken back. My father looked between all of us, his expression shifting into something I hadn't seen before. Not confusion. Not discomfort. Recognition. Like he was finally seeing the situation for what it actually was. Diane looked around the room. People weren't pretending anymore. They were watching. Listening. Understanding. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't controlling the narrative. You planned this, she said, her voice unsteady now, turning back to me. You did this to humiliate me. I shook my head once. No, I said. I did this so I wouldn't be alone when you told the truth. That was the difference. And it was one she couldn't process. Because in her version of the world, everything was either control or chaos. She didn't understand something in between. Something grounded. Something deliberate. Rachel's hand remained on my shoulder. Steady. Present. Real. And in that moment, standing in the middle of a restaurant full of people who had believed Diane's version of my life for years. The truth didn't need to be loud. It just needed to exist. And it did. Diane stood there for a few seconds longer, like her body hadn't caught up to what had just happened. Her eyes moved from Rachel, to Daniel, to Lucas, then back to me. Searching. Not for truth. For control. But there wasn't any left. Not here. Not tonight. This is inappropriate, she said finally, her voice thinner now, stretched tight over something she couldn't quite hold together. You don't bring strangers into a private family matter. Rachel didn't react to the word strangers. She didn't flinch. She didn't correct her. She just stayed where she was, her hand still resting lightly on my shoulder, steady in a way that didn't need to defend itself. They're not strangers, I said. And that was it. No explanation. No raised voice. Just a statement that didn't leave room for interpretation. Diane's mouth opened like she was about to argue, but nothing came out right away. Because every argument she had relied on before depended on one thing. That I needed her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't. My father pushed his chair back slowly, the legs scraping softly against the floor. He stood up, not abruptly, not dramatically, just done. I think we should go, he said. Diane turned toward him sharply. I'm not leaving, she snapped. Not like this. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at her for a long moment, something quiet settling into his expression. Then he picked up his jacket and walked toward the door. He didn't wait. That was the part that surprised me. Not that he left, but that he left first. Diane watched him go, something shifting across her face that looked almost like disbelief. Because for years, he had stayed. Stayed quiet. Stayed compliant. Stayed beside her. And now, in the one moment where she needed that reinforcement the most, he wasn't there. She turned back to me, her composure slipping further. "You think this changes anything?" she said. I met her eyes. "It already has," I replied. Her jaw tightened. She looked around the restaurant again, taking in the faces, the attention, the reality that this moment wasn't contained anymore. That people had heard. Understood. Connected the pieces. And there was nothing she could do to pull it back. For the first time in her life, her version of the story wasn't the only one in the room. She grabbed her purse. Not gracefully. Not with control. Just, quickly. "I did what I had to do," she said, her voice sharper now, like she was trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. "You have no idea what we went through." I didn't respond to that. Because maybe she believed it. Maybe she didn't. But it didn't change anything that mattered. She hesitated for a second longer, like she was expecting someone, anyone, to back her up. No one did. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her heels hitting the floor harder than necessary, each step louder than the last. The door opened. Closed. And just like that, she was gone. The room didn't erupt. There was no dramatic reaction. Just a slow return to normal. Conversations picked back up in low tones. Silverware moved again. The music filled the space where tension had been sitting just moments before. Life continued. But something had shifted. Not just for me. For everyone who had witnessed it. I looked down at the table. The unsigned paper was still there. The pen beside it. Useless now. I folded the paper once. Twice. Then slid it back across the table toward the empty seat Diane had left behind. Not out of anger. Not out of defiance. Just, done. Rachel's hand was still on my shoulder. Warm. Steady. Present. After a moment, she moved around the table and sat in the chair Diane had been in. Not replacing her. Just occupying the space. Daniel took the seat beside her. Lucas grabbed an extra chair from a nearby table and pulled it in without asking, like it had always been his place to do that. For a few seconds, no one said anything. Not because there wasn't anything to say, but because some moments don't need to be filled right away. Then Rachel looked at me. Her eyes softer now, but still steady. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," she said quietly. I shook my head once. "I needed to," I replied. And that was the truth. Because hearing it out loud had set me free from it. The waiter approached slowly, like he wasn't entirely sure if he should interrupt. Rachel glanced up. "Could we get a few more menus?" she asked. Her voice was calm. Normal. Grounded. "Of course," he said quickly. A few minutes later, plates were set down. Food arrived. And something unexpected happened. We started talking. Not about what had just happened. Not about Diane. Not about the past. Just talking. Lucas made a joke about how I had picked the most dramatic possible way to introduce them. Daniel asked about my job, actually listening to the answers instead of waiting for his turn to speak. Rachel asked small questions. Not invasive. Not overwhelming. Just interested. At one point, Lucas reached across the table and took a piece of bread off my plate without asking. I looked at him. He shrugged. You weren't eating it, he said. I almost laughed. Because that, something so small, so normal, felt more real than anything I had experienced at a dinner table in years. For the first time. I wasn't performing. I wasn't calculating my responses. I wasn't managing someone else's expectations. I was just there. After dinner, we stepped outside. The air was cooler now, the street quieter. For a moment, we all just stood there, the weight of everything settling into something more manageable. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. She handed it to me. I was saving this, she said. I opened it. Inside was the hospital wristband. The same one she had shown me the first day. Baby boy Whitmore. I turned it over in my hands, the plastic light but solid, the ink faded but still there. I think it belongs with you now, she said. I didn't say anything right away. I just nodded. Because some things don't need words. That night, I didn't go back to my apartment. I didn't need to. The next morning, I packed everything. It didn't take long. A few boxes. A couple of bags. 7 years of my life reduced to something that fit in the back of my car. Megan came by to help. She didn't ask questions. She just carried boxes. At one point, she paused, looking around the empty space. That's it, she asked. Yeah, I said. She shook her head slightly. Doesn't feel like enough for 7 years. I picked up the last box. It was enough, I said. Just not what I thought it was. I left the key on the kitchen counter in the main house. No note. No explanation. Nothing left to say. Then I got in my car and drove. 3 hours. Same road. Different direction. When the sign for Asheville came into view, something in my chest shifted. Not relief. Not excitement. Something quieter. Something steadier. Like arriving instead of escaping. 1 year later. I'm 26. I have my own place now. Small apartment, 2nd floor, a window that looks out over a line of trees that turn gold in the fall. I pay every bill myself. Rent. Insurance. Utilities. No one holds anything over me. No one can. Rachel still lights a candle every March 15th. But now, I'm there when she does. Daniel grills something outside, no matter the weather. Lucas still sends me things I don't understand and expects me to react like I do. And me? I'm not someone's tax benefit. I'm not someone's obligation. I'm not part of an arrangement. I'm just me. And for the first time in my life. That's enough. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt familiar or hit closer than you expected, go ahead and subscribe to Women Reddit Stories. There's always another story waiting, and sometimes hearing someone else's truth helps you understand your own a little better. Take care of yourself. And remember, if someone calls control love, you're allowed to question it. You're allowed to walk away. And you're allowed to find something real.